Every executive in the league wanted a piece of him, and they were willing to empty their pockets to get it. According to major sports media reports, back in the spring of 1980, right after his freshman season at Virginia, Sampson reportedly turned down a massive multi-million-dollar contract offer from the Boston Celtics. Red Auerbach himself was ready to hand him the keys to the kingdom. Reporters noted at the time that turning down that kind of guaranteed money was almost unheard of. Why would a generational talent risk his body playing for free against college kids when the pros were practically begging to make him a millionaire overnight? The tension around his choice was thick. One wrong step, one bad landing on a gymnasium floor, and the golden ticket could have vanished forever. But Sampson bet on himself, stayed all 4 years, and controlled his own destiny. When he finally decided he was ready, the league was waiting. In June of 1983, he was selected as the undisputed #1 overall pick in the pro draft by the Houston Rockets, according to Basketball Archives. The franchise was struggling, desperate for a savior, and they placed the entire weight of their future squarely on his slender shoulders. He was stepping into a man's league with the expectations of a god. But arriving down in Texas with the weight of the world on his back quickly proved to be a lonely burden, until a single coin flip in a boardroom altered the course of basketball history forever. Nobody could say Ralph Sampson did not deliver on the impossible hype right out of the gate. When he touched down in Houston, he instantly became the face of the franchise, putting up numbers that had veterans shaking their heads. He was gliding up and down the court, dominating the paint and giving the fans a reason to pack the arena again. But looking back, there was a darker side to that brilliant first year. The Rockets were not a deep team. They were leaning on their rookie center for virtually every aspect of their game plan, night in and night out. During that 1983-84 season, Sampson was an absolute force. He averaged a staggering 21 points and 11.1 rebounds per game, according to Basketball Archives. He was doing everything, playing heavy minutes, banging against the bruises of the era while trying to maintain his finesse game. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on his nightly highlights, showing him effortlessly swatting shots and running the fast break. But behind the scenes, a quiet tension was building. Who was actually monitoring the physical toll this extreme workload was taking on a rookie of his unique proportions? A 7'4" frame is not built to absorb that kind of nightly punishment alone, especially when carrying a whole roster on its back. His dominance was undeniable, though. In May of 1984, he was overwhelmingly voted the Rookie of the Year, receiving the honor over highly touted peers as documented in a press conference transcript from the league. He had the trophy, he had the respect, but the front office knew a harsh truth. Management knew his body couldn't survive being a one-man army for a decade. They had to get him some help, which is exactly why the summer of 1984 brought an addition that transformed Sampson from a solitary star into half of a terrifying monster. You have to remember how wild the draft rules were back then. The worst teams in each conference simply flipped a coin to see who got the first pick. It was pure luck. In June of 1984, the Houston Rockets won that pivotal coin flip against the Portland Trail Blazers, securing the #1 pick for the second year in a row, according to public documents outlining the league's draft history. And with that pick, they selected a raw, explosive big man out of the University of Houston named Hakeem Olajuwon. Overnight, the Twin Towers were born. The synergy between the two towering centers was immediate and terrifying for the rest of the league. But making it work required a massive sacrifice. Sampson, the reigning Rookie of the Year, willingly gave up some of his own offensive spotlight to slide over to the power forward position. We are talking about a man standing nearly 7.5 feet tall, chasing opposing forwards out on the perimeter. That was a revolutionary concept in the mid-'80s. According to Basketball Archives, during that 1984-85 season, the newly minted Twin Towers combined to average 42 points and over 23 rebounds per game. They were an absolute nightmare matchup. However, observers and reporters noted at the time that playing two true giants together was a massive experiment. And that raised a deeply uncomfortable question. Did pushing Sampson further out onto the perimeter, forcing his massive frame to constantly change directions and chase smaller, quicker forwards, secretly accelerate his physical breakdown? The wear and tear on his joints had to be compounding, yet in the moment nobody wanted to look at the warning signs. Their chemistry was silencing the critics at a breakneck speed, setting the stage for a dramatic postseason clash in the spring of 1986 against the reigning kings of the Western Conference. The momentum in Houston was building at a terrifying speed. Going into their third year together, the young Rockets were no longer just an interesting experiment. They were a legitimate threat. To understand how peak Ralph Sampson operated, you have to look at how he carried himself before the injuries took hold. He was fluid, confident, and playing with a visible joy. According to Basketball Archives, during that 1985-86 season, Sampson played in 79 games. That number is crucial because it marks the absolute physical peak of his career and the last time he would ever make it through a mostly healthy season. The true test came in the Western Conference Finals against the reigning kings of the era, the Showtime Los Angeles Lakers. Nobody outside of Texas gave the Rockets a real chance. The Lakers had the pedigree, the rings, and the swagger. But Houston played a bruising, physical brand of basketball that systematically dismantled the Los Angeles game plan. Sampson was brilliant, matching up against established legends and proving he belonged on the same floor. The series was a grueling mix of psychological warfare and paint dominance. Houston pushed the Lakers to the brink, leading the series 3-1. Then came the moment that etched his name into basketball history forever. On May 21, 1986, in Game 5 at the Forum, the score was tied with 1 second left on the clock. Television broadcasts from that night captured the chaos perfectly. The inbound pass went high toward the rim. Sampson caught the ball in midair, twisted his massive frame, and launched a blind turnaround jumper before his feet ever touched the floor. The ball bounced off the rim and dropped through the net at the buzzer. He was the hero of Houston and the slayer of Showtime. But just 2 weeks later, on the biggest stage the sport had to offer, the narrative surrounding him would violently flip from undisputed hero to a major liability. Winning the West meant earning a ticket to the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics, a team built like a brick wall and perfectly willing to hurt you if you drove the lane. This was not the finesse game of the Lakers. This was rough, punishing, old-school basketball. The Celtics wanted to test the pride of the young Rockets to see if they would bend under the physical pressure. And the pressure worked. The series became a grind, and frustrations on the Houston sideline began to simmer as Boston took control. The tension finally boiled over on June 5, 1986. During Game 5, with the Rockets fighting just to stay alive in the series, Sampson found himself tangled up with Celtics guard Jerry Sichting. Sichting was a foot shorter and weighed nearly 100 pounds less, but the pushing escalated instantly. Archived television coverage showed the towering center throwing punches in a shocking, chaotic brawl right on the parquet floor. Sampson was immediately ejected from the game. According to major sports media reports at the time, the league stepped in swiftly, hitting him with a financial penalty of $4,500. But the real cost was not the fine. Reporters noted at the time how rapidly his public image shifted. Almost overnight, the sports media branded him as undisciplined and easily rattled. Some columns openly questioned if the Giant was actually soft, suggesting that Boston had successfully gotten inside his head. It was a harsh, unyielding assessment of a young player who had just carried his team to the finals. The Celtics ultimately took the trophy and shattered Houston's pride. But what shattered during the winter of the following season would prove impossible to repair. Coming off a finals appearance, the expectations for the Rockets were sky high. They were supposed to be the team of the future, destined to battle for championships for the next decade. But the human body has limits, and a 7'4" frame is a delicate piece of machinery. The heavy minutes, the relentless pounding inside the paint, and the constant defensive shuffling on the perimeter were quietly taking their toll. The breaking point arrived without any warning during a regular season road trip. According to major sports media reports, in February 1987, Sampson suffered a devastating slip during a game against the Denver Nuggets. The diagnosis was grim, a severe tear to the cartilage in his left knee. Suddenly, the future of the franchise was lying on an operating table. He underwent arthroscopic surgery, a procedure that, especially in that era, required significant rest and careful rehabilitation. But the timeline of his recovery became a massive point of controversy. As documented in player interviews and memoirs years later, Sampson returned to the court a mere 8 weeks after his surgery. That single decision changed the trajectory of his entire life. Medical experts and journalists alike questioned the logic. Why rush a franchise cornerstone back so quickly? By some accounts, there was immense internal pressure to salvage a playoff run, though team doctors publicly maintained he was cleared to play. Whatever the true motivation, the results were disastrous. He was visibly hobbled, a pale shadow of the athlete who had hit the miracle shot just a year earlier. The trust between the medical staff, the front office, and their star player began to fracture. He dragged his damaged leg through the playoffs out of sheer loyalty to his teammates. But instead of rewarding his sacrifice, management was already quietly shopping his name behind his back. There is a harsh reality in professional basketball that fans rarely want to acknowledge until it happens to their favorite player. The moment a franchise believes your body is failing, loyalty becomes a luxury they can no longer afford. Houston had built their entire identity around the Twin Towers, but the front office was growing terrified of Sampson's medical charts. He was pushing himself to play through the pain of his surgically repaired knee, trying to prove his worth, but the explosion that once defined his game was gone. According to Basketball Archives, early in that 1987-88 season, he managed to play only 19 games for Houston, hobbling through possessions and struggling to find his footing. Behind closed doors, the organization had seen enough. The front office made a calculated, cold-blooded decision to dismantle the towering duo before Sampson's trade value dropped to zero. On December 12, 1987, the hammer dropped. According to public transaction records from the league, Houston abruptly traded Sampson and guard Steve Harris to the Golden State Warriors in exchange for Sleepy Floyd and Joe Barry Carroll. The sheer suddenness of the move sent shockwaves through the locker room. Reporters noted at the time that the trade felt like a massive betrayal to a player who had just carried the franchise to the finals a year and a half prior. As some reports claimed, the front office suspected his days as a superstar were already over and simply cut their losses. Sampson was devastated, forced to pack his bags and leave the team he helped build. He hoped the California sun would offer a fresh start and time to heal, but instead he walked straight into a philosophical war with a head coach who had zero patience for an immobile big man. Arriving in Oakland should have been a chance to reset, but Golden State was arguably the worst possible destination for a 7'4" center with a deteriorating knee. The Warriors were coached by Don Nelson, a man famous for a relentless, fast-paced, small-ball offensive system. Nelson wanted his players constantly running the floor, pushing the tempo, and switching on defense. It was a track meet disguised as a basketball game, and Sampson was physically incapable of keeping up. The fit was disastrous from the very beginning. Sports media coverage at the time focused heavily on the awkward dynamic between the struggling giant and his demanding coach. One version says the friction stemmed from a strict coaching philosophy that flatly refused to accommodate Sampson's physical limitations. Instead of slowing the game down to utilize his remaining post skills, he was expected to run the floor, which only highlighted his lack of mobility. The decline in his production was steep and undeniable. According to Basketball Archives, during the full 1988-89 season, his scoring plummeted drastically to just 6.4 points per game. He went from being the focal point of an offense to an afterthought sitting at the end of the bench. By the close of his tenure with the Warriors, he was logging a mere 17.8 minutes per night, according to Basketball Archives. It was a humbling collapse for a man who used to dictate the flow of the entire league. The tension in the locker room finally reached a breaking point, and Golden State had seen enough of the struggling giant, officially giving up on the experiment and shipping him to a franchise where veteran careers often went to die quietly. Sacramento in the late 80s was a tough place to play. The team was struggling to find an identity, losing games in bunches, and desperate for any semblance of star power. But the version of Ralph Sampson that arrived in California's capital was a ghost of the man who once dominated the paint. According to major sports media reports, on September 27, 1989, Golden State traded him to the Sacramento Kings for veteran Jim Peterson. He was no longer a franchise cornerstone. He was just another expiring contract being shuffled around the league. The psychological toll of this fall from grace had to be immense. Just a few years earlier, he was hitting miracle shots in the playoffs and appearing on magazine covers. Now, he was a heavily taped-up backup center fighting just to get out of bed in the morning, playing out the string on a roster going nowhere. What was keeping him on the floor at this point? According to press coverage from that era, many wondered if it was pure competitive fire, a refusal to accept the reality of his failing body, or simply the need to secure the guaranteed money left on his contract. Whatever the motivation, the physical breakdown could not be ignored. In the 1989-90 season, Sampson appeared in just 26 games for the Kings before his back and knees forced him to shut it down yet again, according to Basketball Archives. He was placed on the injured list, spending more time in the training room than on the hardwood, watching his career slip away from the sidelines. After a painful release from Sacramento, he made one desperate final call to return to the area where his legend began, hoping for a miracle finish. There is a profound comfort in going home when the rest of the world has worn you down. For Ralph Sampson, the state of Virginia was where he had always been a king. It was where he dominated high school floors and where he built a college legacy that people still talk about today. So, after the frustrating stints out west, he looked back toward the East Coast to find a final landing spot. According to public transaction records from the league, in November of 1991, Sampson signed as a free agent with the Washington Bullets. He was back near his roots, playing for the franchise right in his own backyard, hoping to script a dignified final chapter. But the reality on the hardwood was painfully different from the nostalgia. The towering phenom who once glided end to end like a gazelle was now heavily braced, laboring up and down the court, fighting a body that simply refused to cooperate anymore. Television coverage at the time focused on the tragic contrast between the unstoppable college star from a decade earlier and the broken veteran trying to squeeze out a few solid minutes off the bench. It was difficult for longtime fans to watch. The comeback attempt was brief and unforgiving. According to Basketball Archives, he managed to play only 10 games for the Bullets that season, making minimal impact before the front office made a final decision. In January of 1992, Washington officially waived him. The NBA had closed its doors on him forever, but for a man whose entire identity was built on the rhythm of the game, walking away completely proved to be a psychological impossibility. It is hard to explain to someone outside of professional sports just how difficult it is to take off the jersey for the last time. The arena lights go out, the crowds go home, but the competitor inside is still wide awake, convinced he has one more run left in him. Instead of transitioning into a quiet retirement, Sampson packed his bags and went looking for a game anywhere the door was left open. According to major sports media reports, during that 1991-92 season, he crossed the Atlantic and suited up for Unicaja Ronda in the Spanish League. But his failing knees offered no mercy overseas, and that experiment lasted only 8 games before he was released. Still, he refused to let it go. Fast forward a couple of years, and you find a much grittier, far less glamorous reality. According to Basketball Archives, by the 1994-95 season, his name appeared on the active roster of the Rockford Lightning in the minor league Continental Basketball Association. We are talking about a former multimillionaire, a man who once commanded the cover of national magazines and battled the Showtime Lakers, now riding long buses through the cold to play in half-empty community gymnasiums. Reporters covering the minor leagues noted at the time how surreal it was to see a giant of his stature grinding for minor league scraps. As some outlets claimed, his continued efforts to stay on the court were reportedly driven not just by a stubborn love of the sport, but by the early quiet signs of a looming financial disaster. When the basketball finally stopped bouncing for good, the real world caught up to him with a vengeance, bringing a wave of headlines that had nothing to do with sports and everything to do with survival. The transition away from the league is notoriously dangerous. When the massive paychecks suddenly stop but the lifestyle and the obligations remain, the math gets ugly in a hurry. For Sampson, the post-playing years brought a wave of deeply personal and highly publicized struggles. This was not the story of a villain. It was the tragically common narrative of an athlete whose primary income stream dried up long before he had a safety net in place to catch his fall. Court records showed the severe depth of his financial collapse. In 2005, he pleaded guilty in federal court to owing nearly $300,000 in back child support for 2 children. The numbers were staggering, and the situation quickly spiraled from a private crisis into a painful public spectacle. Just a year later, the story took an even heavier turn. According to public documents and news reports from late 2006, he was sentenced to 2 months in prison for a mail fraud charge connected to the purchase of a luxury SUV. Reporters noted at the time that the former face of the Houston franchise was now standing before a judge, completely stripped of all the glamour and protection the league used to provide. It was a humbling and devastating public fall for a man who used to hold the basketball world in the palm of his hand. For a time, it seemed his legacy would be permanently stained by police blotters and broken promises. But basketball history has a unique way of forgiving those who suffered for the game. If you stick around the game long enough, you realize that history has a way of correcting itself. The courtroom battles and the quiet, humbling years in minor league gymnasiums eventually faded from the front pages. As the years rolled on, the game of basketball underwent a massive evolution. We entered an era where 7-footers routinely brought the ball up the court and shot from the perimeter. Suddenly, modern fans and analysts started looking back at old footage from the early 80s, and the narrative around Ralph Sampson began to profoundly shift. Television coverage at the time of his retirement had focused almost entirely on his physical breakdown and unfulfilled potential. But retrospective analysis shows something different. He was not a disappointment. He was a pioneer playing 30 years before the rest of the league was ready for him. The ultimate validation for his unique trailblazing career finally arrived from the highest level of the sport. According to press transcripts and television reports from that weekend, on September 7, 2012, Ralph Sampson was officially enshrined into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. It was a moment of profound exoneration that washed away decades of unfair criticism. Reporters covering the ceremony noted at the time how at peace he looked, stepping up to the podium not as a broken prospect, but as a respected elder statesman who had survived the absolute highest highs and lowest lows the sport had to offer. All the labels of being too fragile or undisciplined were permanently replaced by the undeniable recognition of his pure, game-changing talent. The ceremony also offered a beautiful, full-circle conclusion to one of the most fascinating chapters in league history. As documented in a press conference transcript from that evening during his induction speech, he stood proudly